Fromsoft created one of the biggest series in gaming, being of course the Dark Souls games, and then those that preceded them. These games are all unique in some ways, but overall are very similar. Demon's Souls and all Dark Souls games are pretty much the same mechanically. You can dodge, you can use a shield, lighten heavy attacks, etc. The worlds work similarly, and there really isn't too much that differs between them, except of course their experience with the genre and obvious improvements to mechanics and enemies as the games evolve. Then Bloodborne came out, which is a different kind of game, but still keeps the fundamentals. And of course, now we have Elden Ring, which is again most similar to the Dark Souls games, now improved upon and mastered in an open world. But there is one game that came out in 2019 that is the most unique that Fromsoft have released, and that is, of course, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro still has a lot of mechanics from the other games, yet plays completely differently. Sekiro has a different focus narratively, some of the best combat in all of gaming, and a few other things that make Sekiro an incredible game and almost perfect. Sekiro is the most story-focused game we have seen by From Software. For one, we have a voiced protagonist, and the game takes place during the big event rather than, say, Dark Souls, where you learn of things that happened before and you play in the aftermath of such events. At the start, it shows a cutscene of a war being fought. This war is ultimately won by Isshin Ashina, who takes control of the land. A young boy is found at the battlefield and taken in by Owl, who becomes the boy's foster father, and then that boy goes on to become a master shinobi. This is, of course, the player character, known as Wolf. 2 decades after the opening cutscene, Ashina is attacked by the Interior Ministry, whose goal is to unify Japan. So to save the Ashina clan, Isshin's adoptive grandson Genichiro, since Isshin is very elderly and near death at this point, seeks a boy called Kuro, the last of the dragon heritage line, to use his blood to create an immortal army. Wolf is tasked to defend Kuro as essentially his bodyguard. So at the start of the gameplay, you rescue Kuro and try to escape but encounter Genichiro. You have a duel with him as the tutorial boss, but it's one where you lose regardless and end up having your arm cut off. Genichiro takes Kuro and you awake at the dilapidated temple with a new prosthetic arm, which has many abilities like a grappling hook. You fight your way to Ashina Castle, where you encounter Genichiro again. You defeat him this time, but he survives as he has immortality himself, or at least a corrupted immortality. You speak with Kuro and go through many dialogue lines and need to find 3 things: the Mortal Blade, which is a blade that can sever immortality, and a few other items to aid the ritual. Once you have collected these items, you find Owl, who was presumed dead if you used the Buddha's idol earlier in the game, who wants the power of immortality for himself. If choosing to obey Owl, you get the bad or Shura ending, where you kill Emma, who has been kind of the role of a firekeeper in gameplay, but is Isshin's doctor, and then kill an elderly but still very capable Isshin. Owl goes to kill Genichiro and now is very powerful, but then Wolf, corrupted by bloodlust, kills Owl also. If you choose to stay loyal to Kuro, then you kill Owl and enter the Divine Realm to get the last ingredient for immortal severance. You kill the Divine Dragon and take its tears, and come back to Ashina to discover the Interior Ministry have launched an attack, Isshin has passed, and Kuro has been taken again. You find Kuro with Genichiro where you fought at the beginning of the game. You see that Kuro is bleeding. Now, normally people of the dragon's heritage cannot bleed by normal means, but you find that Genichiro has found a second mortal blade. After defeating Genichiro, he sacrifices himself and turns into Prime Isshin as a final attempt to restore Ashina. You defeat him and can get the immortal severance ending, where you kill Kuro and end the line of the dragon's heritage. There are a few other endings, one including being able to end your own life at the end instead of Kuro's, and this frees Kuro of the dragon's heritage, and also the return ending, where you work with the Divine Child, the one who guards the Mortal Blade, to make her a vessel for the Divine Dragon's power. After beating the final boss, you take Kuro to the Divine Child, who then absorbs him, and then they both leave on a journey to return the dragon's heritage to its home, somewhere in the west. Sekiro's story is really interesting, and I enjoy the more streamlined focus. There is a lot more dialogue to find out more about the story, not just through item descriptions, and I enjoyed getting each of the endings. Sekiro has one of the most enjoyable combat systems in any game I've ever played. Sekiro is all about the deflect and posture mechanic. Pretty much every attack an enemy does can be deflected. And what's really good in Sekiro, and without it would be incredibly frustrating, is that the timing is not that precise. You can be spamming the deflect button during a combo, and most of them will be a perfect deflect, indicated by a larger spark from the swords clashing. But even if you don't get the perfect timing, if you are just spamming it, you will still block the attack anyway, so the damage is heavily negated. The posture bar is also incredibly important. Basically, enemies have their actual health bar, but a posture bar also. You can kill enemies by just taking down their actual health, however it is typically very slow and needs to have the perfect attacks that actually land on them that don't get blocked or countered. Instead, if you are constantly attacking an enemy and they are blocking or deflecting themselves, you add damage to their posture bar. You also add more with deflecting their attacks yourself. If this bar goes up the whole way, regardless of the enemy's actual health, you will get an instant death blow, either killing an enemy outright, or if it's a boss or mini-boss, taking away one of their phases. This is the most satisfying system Fromsoft have used. From the visuals of deflecting, to that feeling of mastering attacks and not taking any damage, to the sounds of the swords coming together, it's just great and it makes it so fun. Another great thing about Sekiro is that aggression is rewarded immensely. Sekiro and Bloodborne are the two games where aggressive combat is encouraged. Bloodborne with the fast combat, less stamina consumption and the rally mechanic, and Sekiro with the posture bar. Some bosses, in particular endgame bosses, their posture bar depletes very quickly. Basically, if you haven't been attacking an enemy for a while, the amount you have filled the bar will begin to decrease, meaning you have to attack even more now. You need to constantly be attacking the enemy and getting into this rhythmic battle with them, and it actually makes the bosses easier. The bosses have less chance to do most of their moves when you are constantly attacking. When you are attacking or deflecting, the enemy will do their attacks until there is a larger spark, meaning their attack is now ended and you can attack until you see that same spark where the combat kinda resets and you either need to defend their onslaught or attack again yourself. If you just sit and wait for the enemy to attack you, you will have to deal with their whole moveset, which can be overwhelming, as well as them doing massive posture damage to you. Being aggressive is the best form of defense in Sekiro, making combat more enjoyable and engaging overall. Apart from deflecting, enemies have perilous attacks, where there will be a red flashing symbol indicating that they are about to do an attack that cannot be dodged or blocked. It can be a sweeping attack that you can just jump over, or a grab where you need to outdistance, or a thrust attack where you can deflect perfectly but take huge posture damage, or can get a skill from the skill tree called the Mikiri counter. With this skill, on any thrust attack, you can press the dodge button before it lands and you will stand on the blade, dealing a lot of posture damage to the enemy. These do break up the constant attack and deflect gameplay, which is nice and can also, in the cases of the Mikiri counter, be used to your benefit, especially against spear enemies. You can dodge in Sekiro, but it is pretty pointless. It has barely any iframes and the animation isn't long anyway, so there's never really a need to do it. I mainly do it as a recovery roll where if you get hit or your posture is broken, you can do a safety roll, pretty much like the Souls games. You also have a prosthetic arm. This is used for the grappling around the world, but you can also add tools to it. These have different effects in combat, such as the firecrackers that stun enemies. You can have a loaded axe that does a lot of damage and can cut through shields. And you can have the loaded umbrella, which acts as a shield that deflects every hit, and so on. You can have 3 equipped at a time and change them at any point, and can also upgrade them. Some are pretty cool, but I barely use them. I use the firecrackers as they are really useful on pretty much every enemy and boss. However, a lot of the others are kinda useless or very situational. There are combat arts, which are these special attacks. The most useful is the Mortal Draw, where you use the Mortal Blade, and it does a lot of posture damage. Most other ones are boss moves. A lot are from Ishin, like the Ichimonji and Ashen Across. These, along with the prosthetic arm, use spirit emblems. These can be found around the game or purchased and are set to a certain amount that can be used until you rest. Again, these are cool, but I didn't find myself using any other than the Mortal Draw, since it's just better than most. The others are very slow and aren't as effective, especially to their posture bar. One little gripe I have with combat in Sekiro is that it absolutely does not work against multiple enemies. Fighting a lot of enemies at the same time is never a good experience in any of Fromsoft's games, but is even worse in Sekiro since the dodge is pretty much non-existent and you can only deflect one enemy at a time. It also doesn't help that the recovery time after getting hit is really long and you can get stun locked fairly easily. It's just not worth it to engage with multiple enemies. Sprinting past and collecting necessary items works just fine. Sekiro is very consistent in its bosses, both major and mini ones. Many bosses are closer to normal enemies and show up multiple times throughout the game. Beating them grants the player a prayer bead, and when 4 are collected, you can upgrade your health and posture. You can do this a max of 10 times to max out both the health and posture bars. The main bosses grant a memory which increases attack power. Sekiro has got rid of the traditional leveling up system from the Souls games, and I really like the change. Now you are unable to farm for attack power or health, so the game is much more balanced. And there are many bosses in the game that can be reached early on, as well as finding prayer beads throughout the game. I wanted to go a bit more in depth to some of the main bosses, at least the ones that are most noteworthy. Starting with Gyobu. Gyobu is the first main boss of Sekiro and is a fine introduction. Gyobu isn't too difficult, but can be an overwhelming first boss, since as he's mounted he is running around a lot and is pretty sporadic. Just a bit before Gyobu, there's an eavesdrop opportunity. These are throughout the game and give insight into future bosses. So this one is a guy saying how firecrackers scared their horse, and with this knowledge you can use them on Gyobu, and the horse stuns for a while, allowing you to get your attacks in. Gyobu is a good first boss as it will be challenging on a first playthrough, but isn't anything too crazy. Genichiro is your skill check. If you can't beat him, then you won't be able to go much further in the game. He is pretty much perfect. He is really fair and is overall a really satisfying fight. He can shoot arrows at you if you are at a distance. He has a multi-hit combo where you can either avoid it entirely or try and deflect every attack, doing massive posture damage. He has a perilous attack which will be a thrust in the first phase, in which you can just Makiri counter, and in the second will most likely be his sweep, although he can still do the thrust. Then he has a third phase where he uses lightning, and in Sekiro you can reverse lightning by pressing the attack button as it lands on you in the air, and you return it back to Genichiro, which stuns him. It's a really cool mechanic added to the fight, and actually makes it a lot easier, even though it is intimidating at the start. Genichiro is a great boss to test your skill, and once you can beat him, you are prepared for the rest of the game, or at least you should be. The folding screen monkeys are a unique boss. There are 4 monkeys and they each have a gimmick. One is invisible, one can't see but hears well, one can't hear but sees well, and one makes a huge racket when they spot you. It's a cool fight, but it can be quite frustrating. There is an intended way to beat them by doing things like waiting for one of them to go in the waterfall room where they can't hear you, or the really dark loft area, but I can't be bothered to do that every time, so you can just use a Gatchin Sugar and do a really quick strategy that only takes around a minute. Guardian Ape is one of the most notorious Sekiro bosses, and one of the hardest. His first phase is very sporadic fighting the ape. He jumps around, slams and rolls everywhere, and even throws his feces at you, which was something alright. You then cut off his head and think the fight is over, but then he gets back up, carrying his head, and is now attacking with his sword. The second phase is much more enjoyable. You are deflecting his sword attacks, and if you do so perfectly, he will do a huge slam that, if deflected, leaves him open for a long time. He also has this scream where he puts a head up to his neck and has a large AoE that, if you are stuck in, will kill you with terror. Guardian Ape is a really fun boss. The first phase is really cool, but the second phase is more engaging. Overall is a great spectacle. You fight a phantom corrupted monk earlier on in the game, but at the Fountainhead Palace you fight the True Monk. The True Monk is a great fight. It has fun combos to deflect, different perilous attacks, and hits incredibly hard. Its second phase spawns in many clones, which can be tricky, but you can actually deathblow the real one in the middle of the bridge to instantly skip the phase and go into the third. The third phase introduces some toxic attacks. It has one perilous attack that is deadly, but is pretty much the same as the first phase. Divine Dragon is another unique gimmick boss. The first phase you have to destroy all the small dragons that spawn. They spit poison on the ground and can all attack you, but there is a skill that gives you health back on a death blow, which is really handy, so you don't need to waste any heals. Then in the second phase you fight the actual Divine Dragon. Well, I say fight, I mean avoid some wind projectiles, then do a lightning reversal attack. Repeat this like 4 times, and then you do one final one that finishes him off for the death blow. It's a really unique boss at the end of a really unique area, but isn't anything special mechanically, and on repeat playthroughs is more of a chore. Owl Father is an improved version of Owl where you stay loyal to Kuro. He has pretty much the same moveset with a few new ones. Owl is one of the best examples of having to stay aggressive as his posture bar goes down incredibly fast, and you can also attack him out of some perilous attacks. His second phase adds this phantom bird which he can teleport into and then jump out of it with an attack. He can also send it flying at you covered in fire, which you have to avoid. Owl is a really fun fight, though I think is a bit overrated difficulty wise. Demon of Hatred is quite a divisive boss. It pretty much abandons all you have been taught for the game, as deflecting barely works. Your best bet is to dodge most of the attacks, but since it is such a short window, you need to be very precise. He has a lot of fire attacks, as you could guess the big fire demon would, and this adds burns to you as well, which is always great. He has big sweeps that the best case is to dodge. With certain attacks I would deflect, like his stomp, but overall is closer to a Dark Souls boss, which I guess is a fun mix-up, but also pretty frustrating since Sekiro plays nothing like them. But it's still overall a good fight and I do enjoy it. And finally, I want to talk about the final boss, Sword Saint Ishin. My opinion on Ishin has changed since I've fought him multiple times for this video. I still think it's one of the best bosses in the series. It's a really great spectacle, his attacks are great and the changes between each phase are really good as well. Like him adding his spear in the second phase, then lightning reversals in the last. Though I do find him pretty underwhelming, as I don't think it's really all that difficult. Maybe I'm just incredible at the game or something, but I find it actually too easy for a final boss. There's not really a boss in Sekiro, or any of the games prior for that matter, where I find them that difficult, but there's still some others I would say are harder than Ishin, like Orphan of Cause from Bloodborne. A lot of it comes down to being the aggressor in Sekiro, making every fight easier. You can attack longer, and when they attack it will most likely be for one attack or maybe a second. Then you get to go again, but Ishin just didn't have enough with his moveset, especially in the third phase with the lightning reversals, as although it is a cool move, it actually made the phase way too easy as it's just free damage. I do still love Ishin and the fight is great visually, I just wish it was a bit harder is all. Sekiro can be the hardest Fromsoft game in a lot of ways, but it can also become one of the easiest. No doubt new players, regardless of being new into the series or not, will struggle with Sekiro, as it is a drastic change from any other game they have put out. Sekiro is all about getting rid of that Souls instinct to dodge. The tutorial did its job of letting you know about the deflection system, but I don't think it hammered home how vital it is to the game, and especially with the first boss blocking progression, the Chained Ogre. The Chained Ogre is pretty much a Souls boss. You move out the way of the attacks and have to dodge his perilous attacks. I don't think it was a good idea to have the Chained Ogre this early on, as it goes against all you should be trying to learn at this point, especially since Chained Ogre is one of the very few enemies, let alone bosses, where you won't be deflecting. The deflection mechanic is the main thing all players need to get down, and can't go into Sekiro thinking it's similar to Souls, and that's the main reason for the difficulty argument. Sekiro is without a doubt the hardest game to get down. The change is so drastic to the other titles that players were obviously going to struggle with it. However, once mastered, or even just understood, Sekiro really isn't that bad. I mean, at this point, for me personally, all the Souls games are fairly easy. There's not one that still gives me that much of a challenge and can all be enjoyed casually, and Sekiro is no different. The bosses are very easy once you learn the mechanics, maybe even easier than the other games. I remember my first playthrough hearing all about the Ishin final boss and how it was the hardest boss in the series. Then I beat him on my third attempt, and now beating him is really easy. Obviously everything gets easier with time and practice, but Ishin was never really that bad for me. If you stay aggressive, which is a key thing in Sekiro, Ishin has a very limited moveset, and pretty much all the other bosses work this way as well. Sekiro's difficulty just comes from the learning curve, and as with the other games, once you understand, it becomes a much better experience. Although what isn't a good experience and actually really annoying is how the death mechanic works in Sekiro, and I'd say it is the most unfair aspect of the game. When you die, you lose half of your progress bar to your next skill point, but you don't go down an actual point, thankfully, and you also lose half of your currency. You can negate this by purchasing coin purses that have a little interest added on, which again is at least a little redeemable, but that is very punishing for one death. We thought Souls games were bad for dropping all your souls, but at least you had the chance of regaining them. Here they are lost for good. And furthermore, once you have died enough times, some NPCs in the world can get affected by dragon rot. Dragon rot can pause NPC quest lines on who is affected and lowers your unseen aid, which basically affects if you are going to lose your currency when you die. Death is extremely punishing in Sekiro, way more so than the Souls games, and since Sekiro is so different from the other games that came before it, players will be dying much more, thus making it even harder for them. Of course, the resurrection helps, as it's pretty much a second life every time you rest at an idol, and if you get a death blow on a boss after you have resurrected, you regain it for the next phase, so you can pretty much get multiple lives. This does kinda negate how punishing dying is in Sekiro, and is probably balanced for getting a whole other chance, but for first playthroughs, it is incredibly punishing. Sekiro has a much quicker pace than the Souls games. You have an unlimited sprint, you have, as I mentioned, the grappling hook, way less fall damage, and overall sprint speed is pretty quick, as well as being able to jump quite high. Sekiro has amazing replayability. You can do a casual speedrun in probably an hour or less if you are doing the Shura ending. The levels have plenty of hidden areas that can be accessed by a grapple or a wall climb, and traversal is really fun. The skill tree is pretty good as well. There's nothing much to say about it. Sekiro's skill tree has a lot of useful bonuses, like less posture damage taken from swords, etc., and different branches can be found throughout the game. So overall, Sekiro is a great game. The combat is incredibly satisfying, the game is very replay friendly, bosses are fun, and the game has a much easier to understand plot. Sekiro is the most different from the Soul series, so it is understandable if some people don't like it as much. I personally enjoy the slower and methodical roll and attack combat of Souls, but Sekiro is probably the best combat system they have done, and is easily the best part of the game. I find myself just fighting things just to get into that deflect and attack gameplay just because it's so fun. If you think Sekiro is the best game in the series, then I don't think anyone would complain. If anything, I think people's opinions probably change quite regularly. Sekiro is my favourite at the moment because I've been playing it a lot. Other times will be like Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, and that's what's so special about these games. They all have their unique differences that are incredible in each game, and are all some of the best games that have ever been made. And although Sekiro is way different to any of the other games, and a lot more punishing, it is also one of the easier games once understood, and can actually end up being the easiest game in the series. But that is my opinion on Sekiro. Feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments, and thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one.